My name is Natalie Crews. I'm a licensed real estate attorney based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have a corner office with a window that overlooks uptown, a caseload that keeps me busy 6 days a week, and a 4-bedroom house I bought with my own money 3 years before I ever said, I do. I say all of this not to brag, but because every single one of those details matters to what I'm about to tell you. I grew up in Greensboro, the older of 2 daughters. My sister Dana is 3 years younger than me, and for most of our lives, we were close in the way sisters are when they've survived the same mother, the same cramped apartment, the same second-hand everything. We didn't always agree. We didn't always like each other. But she was my sister, and I loved her the way you love someone who has seen every embarrassing and broken version of you. Dana was always the louder one. The one who laughed too hard, stayed out too late, made choices that our mother called impulsive and Dana called living. I was the planner. The one who studied, saved, sacrificed. I put myself through law school on scholarships and loans and sheer stubbornness. Dana floated through community college, worked retail, moved in and out of relationships that never seemed to stick. I never judged her for it. Or at least I tried not to. When I met Marcus at a colleague's dinner party 8 years ago, I thought I'd finally found someone who matched my pace. He was an architect. Steady, charming, detail-oriented. He made me feel like I didn't have to carry everything alone. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, got married. Dana was my maid of honor. She gave a toast that made half the room cry. She hugged me at the end of the night and whispered that she'd never seen me so happy. I believed her. We built a life. Not a flashy one, but a solid one. Marcus moved into my Charlotte house, the one I'd bought before we met, the one with my name on every document, the one I'd painted and repaired and landscaped with my own weekends. He contributed to the bills. We shared a life. We had disagreements about small things and bigger things, but nothing that ever felt like a crack we couldn't repair. Dana visited a few times a year. She'd come for Thanksgiving or a long weekend in summer. She and Marcus always got along easily. Too easily, I'd sometimes think, and then immediately feel guilty for thinking it. He was charming. She was warm. Course they got along. That's what I told myself. About 4 years into our marriage, Dana told me she was pregnant. She said the father was a man she'd been seeing casually, someone who wasn't ready to be a dad and had stepped back. She seemed sad but determined. I supported her. I sent money when she asked. I visited when her son Eli was born, a healthy, beautiful boy with dark eyes and a serious little face. I held him and felt that particular kind of love that surprises you. Eli is 3 years old now. And 3 weeks ago, Dana sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me that Marcus is his father. She said it the way you'd say something you'd been rehearsing. Direct. Like she'd prepared for every possible version of my reaction. And then, before I could even form a single word, she slid a piece of paper across the table and told me she wanted half of my house. I looked at that paper for a long time. And then I looked at my sister. And I thought, you have no idea who you're sitting across from. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw her out of my house, though every nerve in my body was firing at once. I sat very still, the way I do in depositions when opposing counsel says something they think will rattle me, and I waited. Dana filled the silence the way guilty people do, with more words. She told me it had happened once. Then she corrected herself and said a few times. Then she said it had been a few months, during a period when Marcus and I were going through a rough patch. The year I'd been working 80-hour weeks on a major commercial litigation case and was, in her words, never really present. She said it wasn't planned. She said Marcus hadn't known about Eli until recently. She said she hadn't known how to tell me. I noticed she didn't say she was sorry. Not once in that entire speech did the word sorry come out of her mouth. What she said instead was, Eli deserves to know his father, and I deserve some stability for my son. You have a big house, Natalie. You have more than enough. I looked at the paper she'd pushed toward me. It was a handwritten list. Not a legal document, not anything with the weight of law behind it. Just her handwriting laying out what she thought she was owed. Half the house. Or a cash equivalent. Because, she explained, Marcus had helped maintain it during our marriage, which meant marital contributions had been made, which meant Eli's father had a stake, which somehow meant she had a claim. She'd Googled enough to be dangerous and not enough to be right. I'm a real estate attorney. I have spent 15 years understanding exactly how property law works in North Carolina. I know what separate property means. I know what a deed says. I know what premarital ownership documentation looks like and exactly where mine is filed. Dana had walked into my house, and handed me an argument I could dismantle in my sleep. But I didn't say any of that yet. Instead, I asked her one question. Does Marcus know you're here? She hesitated. Just a half second. But I caught it. He knows I was going to talk to you, she said. That half second told me everything. Marcus hadn't sent her. But he hadn't stopped her either. Which meant he knew this was coming and had chosen to be somewhere else while it happened. He'd left me to sit across from my sister and absorb a grenade he'd helped build. I stood up. I told Dana I needed time to process and that she should go. She looked surprised. I think she'd expected tears or rage or collapse. She didn't know that when I go quiet, I'm not falling apart. I'm calculating. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen for 2 hours. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call anyone. I pulled out my laptop and I opened the folder I keep labeled house documents. I looked at the deed. I looked at the purchase agreement. I looked at the date, 3 years before my wedding. I looked at my name alone on every line that mattered. And then I opened a new document and I started writing notes. Because Dana had just made a legal argument in my house, and I was going to answer it the only way I knew how. I have a rule I give to every client who comes to me in the middle of a crisis. Do not respond until you understand the full shape of what you're dealing with. Sounds simple. It is almost impossible to follow when you're the one in the fire. But I have spent years training myself to treat my own emergencies the way I treat casework. With method, not emotion. So that's what I did. The morning after Dana's visit, I didn't call her back. I didn't confront Marcus, though he'd come home that night with the careful, quiet energy of a man waiting for an explosion. I made coffee. I went to my home office. And I started building a file. First, I pulled every document related to my house. The original purchase agreement from 7 years ago. The deed showing my name only. The mortgage, which I had paid off 2 years into our marriage, with my income, documented through my firm's payroll records. The homeowner's insurance in my name. The property tax records in my name. Every renovation receipt, cross-referenced with my personal bank account, predating Marcus by years. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets get divided fairly, not necessarily equally, in divorce. But marital assets has a definition. Separate property, meaning property owned before the marriage and kept separate, is not subject to division. My house had never been retitled. Marcus had never been added to the deed. He had contributed to household expenses during our marriage, yes, but I had records showing my separate mortgage payoff, my separate maintenance costs, my unambiguous ownership. Dana's handwritten list wasn't just legally wrong. It was almost impressively wrong. But I also knew that wrong and unchallenged are two different things. People file frivolous claims every day. Lawyers get hired to argue bad positions. If Dana decided to push this, or if Marcus did, I would need to be ready, not just correct. I called my colleague Priya, a family law attorney I trust completely, and I laid out the situation in clinical terms. When I finished, there was a pause. "Natalie," she said carefully, "you know you're fine on the property, right? This isn't a real claim." "I know," I said. "But I need someone in my corner who isn't me. Because I'm also the wife in this situation, and I can't be objective about that part." She agreed to be on standby. Then I did the thing I'd been avoiding. I thought about Eli. A 3-year-old boy with dark eyes and a serious little face. A child who had done nothing. A child who, if the paternity claim was true, was biologically connected to my husband. I sat with that for a long time because that part, unlike the legal question, had no clean answer. I'm not someone who hates children for their parents' choices. But I'm also not someone who will be manipulated through my own compassion. Dana had led with Eli deliberately. She'd put that child's name in front of the house demand because she knew it made me feel the weight of it differently. It was a tactic. A human one, but still a tactic. I wrote that down too. By the time Marcus knocked on my office door that evening and asked if we could talk, I had a full picture of what I was dealing with. A betrayal, a bad legal claim, a sister who had calculated her approach, and a husband who had stayed silent long enough to become part of the problem. I looked up from my desk. "Sit down," I said. "Natalie, Sit down, Marcus." He sat. And I opened my notebook. There is a particular kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It isn't the silence of someone thinking carefully or choosing words with respect. It's the silence of someone who hoped time would dissolve a problem they created, and is now realizing it didn't. That was the silence Marcus brought into my office that evening. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where I sometimes sit with clients who are in the worst moments of their lives, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as prepared grief. Like he'd already mourned something and was just waiting for me to catch up. I didn't speak first. I've learned that the person who speaks first in a tense silence usually gives away more than they intend to. I've used that technique in depositions for years. I used it on my husband. He lasted about 40 seconds. "I know how this looks," he said. "Tell me how it looks to you," I said. "I want to make sure we're seeing the same thing." He exhaled slowly. And then, piece by piece, he told me his version. He and Dana had gotten close during a period when I was consumed by work. A case that had taken over my life for nearly 8 months. He said he'd felt invisible. He said one thing led to another. He said it had ended before he and I had even resolved that rough patch, that he'd buried it, that he'd convinced himself it was over and done, and that telling me would only cause damage that couldn't be undone. Then Dana had called him 3 months ago. Sent him a photo of Eli. Told him the truth. 3 months ago, I repeated. He nodded. "You've known for 3 months. I didn't know what to do, Natalie. I was trying to figure out. You knew for 3 months, I said again, and you let me find out from her. My own kitchen table. While you were somewhere else." He didn't answer that. Because there was no answer that helped him. I asked him if he'd done a paternity test. He said Dana had sent him one. A home kit, nothing legal, and that the results had indicated a match. I wrote that down. A home kit result is not court admissible. It's also not nothing. I asked him if he had made any promises to Dana. Financial promises. Verbal commitments about the house, about support, about anything. He hesitated. That hesitation cost him more than he realized. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I need you to understand that I am asking you this as someone who will find out the answer regardless. So the only question is whether you tell me now or I discover it another way." He admitted that he had told Dana, in a phone call 3 months ago when he was panicked and not thinking clearly, that he would make sure she was taken care of. He said he hadn't meant the house specifically. He said it was a vague reassurance, not a promise. I wrote that down too. Vague verbal reassurances are not enforceable contracts. But they are the kind of thing opposing counsel loves to put in front of a judge to establish intent and character. Marcus had handed Dana a thread, and Dana had pulled it into a rope. Closed my notebook. "Are you divorcing me?" he asked. His voice was low. There was something genuine in it. Real fear, real loss. I want to be honest about that. I'm not someone who felt nothing in that moment. 8 years is 8 years. I had loved this man in a way that had felt permanent. But I also know that love and legal exposure are 2 separate things, and I had to deal with the legal exposure before I could afford to feel the rest. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I need you to not contact Dana until I tell you to. No calls, no text, no promises, nothing." He agreed. I believed him, mostly because he looked genuinely frightened. Not of me, but of what he'd set in motion. After he left the room, I sat alone and let myself feel it. Just for a few minutes. Years. The trust. The image I'd had of my marriage. Quietly redrawn into something I didn't recognize. I let myself grieve that. Then I closed the door on it and went back to work. By the end of that first week, I had stopped sleeping normally and started sleeping strategically. 4 or 5 hours enough to function, then up before dawn to think. My colleagues noticed I was distracted. I told them I was working through a complex title dispute. That wasn't entirely a lie. I needed to understand the full shape of what Dana was actually claiming before I could decide how to respond. Because Dana's handwritten list was not a legal document, but it was a statement of intent. And people with stated intent have a habit of escalating when ignored. I started with the property question because that was the one I could be most objective about. Under North Carolina law, separate property is defined as property acquired before marriage or received as a gift or inheritance during the marriage, kept separately and not commingled with marital assets. My house met every criterion. I had purchased it 3 years before my wedding. Marcus was never on the deed. The mortgage had been paid off using documented income from my law firm, income earned in my name, tracked through my accounts. Marcus's contributions to household expenses during our marriage, utilities, groceries, occasional repairs, did not transform my separate property into marital property. That's not how it works. The legal standard requires active commingling, retitling, or specific financial contributions tied to appreciation in property value, argued through a formal divisible property claim. Even then, a spouse's claim is against the other spouse, not against a third party like Dana. Dana had no standing to claim my property. Period. But I kept pulling. I called the county register of deeds and requested a certified copy of my deed, not because I doubted my records, but because I wanted a fresh official copy with a current date stamp in my hand. I pulled my mortgage payoff letter from my bank archive. I assembled a chronological paper trail that began before Marcus and ended with me as the sole, unambiguous owner of a fully paid property. Then I turned to the paternity question because that thread, if it unraveled, had consequences beyond my property. I called Priya again and asked her what a legitimate paternity process would look like. She walked me through it. A court-ordered or voluntarily agreed-upon legal DNA test, conducted through an accredited laboratory, with chain of custody documentation. If Marcus was legally established as Eli's father through that process, he would have both rights and responsibilities, visitation rights and child support obligations. That was a Marcus problem, not a me problem. But it was something I needed to factor in. I also quietly called a private investigator I'd worked with on a fraud case the previous year. I asked him to do a basic background search on Dana's finances, not to harm her, but to understand whether there was any pattern of behavior I needed to know about. What he found was modest. Dana had significant credit card debt, a recent eviction from an apartment in Raleigh, and a gap in employment that had lasted almost a year. She needed money. That explained the timing. Not the act itself, that had happened years ago, but the decision to come to me now, with Eli as leverage, at a moment when her financial situation had become urgent. This wasn't just about exposing a secret. This was a financial play. Understanding that changed how I felt. Not less hurt, I want to be clear about that. The hurt was still enormous. But underneath the hurt, something sharper and cleaner settled into place. I knew what she was doing. I knew why. And I knew exactly how to answer it. I drafted a letter. Not threatening, not emotional, just precise. It outlined in plain language the legal reality of my property's status. It noted that I was aware of the nature of her claim and its basis. It stated that any further action on her part would be met with formal legal response. And it ended with a single sentence I'd been composing in my head for days. I suggest you consult an actual attorney before taking another step. I printed it, signed it, sealed it, and then I held it for 2 more days, because I wanted to be certain before I sent it. Certainty, in law and in life, is the thing that separates a good move from a costly one. On day 2, Dana texted me. "You're ignoring me. That's not going to make this go away, Natalie." I read the message, set my phone face down, mailed the letter. The letter arrived at Dana's apartment on a Tuesday. I know because I sent it certified mail and watched the tracking update. She signed for it at 11:14 in the morning. By 3 p.m. she was calling me. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. She left one. A long, unsteady message that moved through several emotional phases. First she was dismissive. The letter was lawyer intimidation, and she wasn't scared of it. Then she was wounded. How could I respond to her this way when she'd finally been honest with me? Then she was threatening. She had screenshots, she said, of conversations. She'd talked to someone who told her she had options. I listened to it twice. Made notes. Saved it. Screenshots of conversations with Marcus were not irrelevant, but they also weren't the weapon she thought they were. A husband saying, "I'll take care of you," to a woman he'd had an affair with does not create a legal obligation enforceable against his wife's premarital separate property. If anything, those screenshots created exposure for Marcus, evidence of a promise he'd made that I could use in divorce proceedings if I chose that route. I called Priya and played her the voicemail. She said she talked to someone, Priya noted. That could mean anything. Friend who watches legal dramas. Or an actual attorney. If it's an actual attorney, I said, that attorney is about to have a very uncomfortable conversation with their client about the merits of this claim. Do you want me to reach out to them formally? Not yet, I said. Let's see if she escalates. She did, but not the way I expected. 2 days after the voicemail, Dana showed up at my house unannounced. Marcus was home, which I hadn't anticipated. I heard the doorbell, heard Marcus answer it, and then heard the distinct and unmistakable sound of my sister's voice rising in a way that told me she had come prepared to perform. Came downstairs slowly, deliberately. Dana was standing in my entryway, the same entryway she'd walked through dozens of times as a guest, holding her phone out toward Marcus, playing something. A recording, I realized, of the conversation in which he'd told her he would take care of her. She looked up at me with an expression that might have been triumph if it wasn't so desperate. He promised, she said. You can hear it. He promised, and this house is part of that promise. I looked at Marcus. He had gone very pale. Then I looked at Dana. Come sit down, I said. Something in my voice made her hesitate. But she followed me into the living room. Marcus trailed behind us. Sat. Opened my laptop. And I walked her through it. Calmly, methodically. The way I would explain a title issue to a first-time homebuyer who'd been given bad information. I showed her the deed. Purchase date. The sole ownership record. The mortgage payoff documentation. The legal definition of separate property in North Carolina. I explained in plain terms that Marcus's verbal statement, whatever his intentions, could not obligate my premarital separate property. That the statement created a potential personal liability for Marcus, not a claim on my house. That she had no legal standing to pursue this, and that any attorney who told her otherwise was either uninformed or taking her money. Dana's expression shifted through several things. Confusion, anger, then something quieter and harder to name. So I get nothing, she said. You were never entitled to anything that was mine, I said. What happens between you and Marcus regarding Eli? A legal paternity test, child support, whatever the court determines, that's between the two of you. But my house was mine before he existed in my life, and it will be mine after. She left without another word. I sat in my living room for a long time after the door closed, looking at the space I had built before anyone else had been a part of it. The walls I'd painted. The floors I'd refinished. The home I'd made by myself for myself, before I'd ever trusted anyone enough to share it. It was still mine. That, at least, had never been in question. There is a moment in every case, I've seen it hundreds of times, where the facts are settled, the documents are in order, and the legal question is resolved. But the human question is still sitting in the room, unfinished and heavy, refusing to be filed away. That was where I found myself the week after Dana left my house. The property was protected. That was done. Priya had reviewed everything and confirmed what I already knew. No viable claim, no real exposure, case closed before it ever opened. Marcus had spoken to a family attorney about the paternity situation, and a formal DNA test had been scheduled. Whatever those results confirmed, a process would follow. Support. Possibly visitation. Legal obligations that were his to carry, Not mine that I had done what I do best. I had built a wall of documents around the thing that mattered and made it untouchable. But I still had to decide what to do with my marriage. I want to be honest here because I think people expect a certain kind of ending to a story like this. They expect either dramatic forgiveness or dramatic exit. A tearful reconciliation or a door slammed so hard the frame shakes. I didn't have either of those. What I had was a yellow legal pad, a quiet Sunday morning, and a list. On one side, I wrote down what my marriage had been before the confession. The good years. The dinners. The way Marcus used to leave architecture sketches on the kitchen counter and explain them to me while I made coffee. The trip to Portugal we took for our 5th anniversary. The ordinary Tuesday evenings that had felt, at the time, like enough. On the other side, I wrote what I now knew. The affair. The months of silence after he learned about Eli. The choice to let Dana come to my house and deliver the grenade while he stayed out of the blast radius. The half-second hesitation when I asked if he'd made her promises. I looked at both sides for a long time. And I understood that the man on the left side of the page had let the man on the right side exist quietly, in the dark, for years. They weren't two different people. They were the same person making different choices depending on what was convenient. I filed for divorce 6 weeks after Dana's visit. I won't say it didn't hurt. It hurt in the way that only long, carefully built things can hurt when they come apart. Not with a sharp pain but with a slow, spreading ache that shows up in strange moments. The first morning I woke up and the other side of the bed was already empty because he had moved out. The evening I cooked dinner for one and realized I didn't know what my portion sizes were supposed to look like anymore. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of grief that doesn't look dramatic from the outside but sits in your chest like something lodged. But I also want to tell you what else happened in those weeks. I repainted the bedroom. A color I had always wanted. A deep, muted sage that Marcus had said was too moody. I bought a new reading chair for the corner by the window. I stayed up past midnight 3 nights in a row finishing a novel I'd been putting off for 2 years. I had Priya over for dinner and we opened a bottle of wine that was too expensive for a weeknight and talked about everything except work. I started remembering who I was before I'd organized my life around being half of something. As for Dana, I have not spoken to her since she walked out of my living room. My mother called me twice trying to broker something using the word family. The way people do when they mean you should absorb this so the rest of us don't have to feel uncomfortable. I love my mother. I told her clearly and without anger that I was not available for that conversation yet, and that yet was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Eli is still in the world. A 3-year-old boy who didn't choose any of this. I think about him sometimes, not with resentment, but with a kind of sad clarity. Whatever relationship he builds with his biological father is not my story to be part of or to block. That door is Marcus's to open or close. My door, the literal one, the front door, the house I bought myself, the house that was never in danger because I had made sure of it, that door is mine. I chose my future over the wreckage. Not because the wreckage didn't hurt, but because I had built something worth walking forward into, and I wasn't going to let someone else's choices determine whether I got to have it. My name is Natalie Crews. I am a licensed real estate attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina. And everything that matters is still in my name.